I sing a song of the saints of God, patient and brave and true, who toiled and fought and lived and died for the Lord they loved and knew. And one was a doctor, and one was a queen, and one was a shepherdess on the green. They were all of them saints of God, and I mean, God help me to be one too.
Hello and welcome to Tea Time Theology. I'm your host for this episode, Taylor Wilkie, and today our guest is the Reverend Tim Rich, rector of St. Luke's Church in East Grenwich. Welcome, Tim.
Taylor, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
It's our pleasure to have you. So this season of Tea Time Theology, we're talking about maybe lesser known characters from the Bible. Obviously, we have the big names like Jesus, Peter,
who,
Mary.
I'm sorry.
Right? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Heard of them all.
Yeah, but we want to take a look at more of the, like I said, the lesser known characters. And when I prompted you, you picked Naomi and Ruth.
I did. You know, first of all, the sad reality about Scripture is that almost all of the female characters in Scripture are the ones that fall under the heading of lesser known. Naomi and Ruth in our Hebrew Scriptures, they are such a rich story. Ruth is the only book in the Hebrew Scriptures that's actually named after a woman. And the characters are fascinating, wonderful, faithful studies. And the story, although brief, is jam-packed. And so they came right to mind when you asked me. So think of a couple characters you'd like to talk about.
The story of Ruth, or the book of Ruth.
The book of Ruth,
right?
Right?
It's a roller coaster.
It is.
It's a really fun roller coaster ride.
Right.
And you just mentioned it before, just to orient ourselves, I guess. The first question is, when does the story of Ruth take place?
So scholars aren't exactly sure with all of these stories. There's kind of a window, right? But, you know, the best guess is somewhere around 1200 BC, give or take a couple of hundred. It follows on the book of Judges, and there's a reference to the time of Judges. That was a time for the Israelites when there were no kings. There were only judges that kind of ruled over the different tribes, the different lands, and frankly, ruled in some pretty morally bankrupt ways. And so in an unspoken way, the book of Ruth represents not only God's reaction to disobedience, that's unspoken as well, but also God's faithfulness to a covenant that God has made with God's people that spans generations and generations and generations. And so at the risk of a spoiler alert, the blessings that conclude the book of Ruth represent that if we but remain hopeful and faithful in our relationship with God, no matter the roller coaster, to use your phrase, no matter the roller coaster of life, God will indeed bless us. So we'll get to the details of that. But the time frame, again, is when judges ruled over the land, and it's around 1200 BC.
So you're saying that the judges acted more like governors over the land at the time?
Well, there weren't kings. And so, they were the rulers. They enforced the laws. They were the ones that sort of presided over the faith covenant that the ancestors of Naomi had established with God. Now, I say the ancestors of Naomi because Ruth was not a part of the tribe, which is one of the wonderful and rich details about the relationship between these two women. We can get to the sort of the story evolution when you want to, but it was Naomi who represented the Israelites and who was the the original part of the covenant before we get to Ruth and the events that followed.
So you say that Ruth and Naomi were not of the same tribe, and in the book it mentions that Ruth is of Moab.
Right. She's a Moabite.
What is a Moabite?
Well, let me do a little bit of a backstory even before we get to the Moabite, if I might, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure.
Naomi is from actually Bethlehem, a little village that will get some pretty significant play later on in the Christian story, right? And so she marries another gentleman from Bethlehem, and then famine strikes the land, and they're forced to move. And they leave land that is inhabited by the fellow Israelites, and they go to the land of Moab, which is a land of a different god and a land of different practices, and so they are aliens in this land. They go seeking food because they're desperate. Right? And they go also with two sons. So there they are living in the land of Moab, and first the father dies, Naomi's husband dies. And so now it's the two boys and Naomi. The boys look to marry. And this is where Ruth comes in. They each marry a woman of Moabite tradition, Ruth and Orpah. And so there's a marriage across cultures that happens here, which, you know, as we still wrestle with marriages across cultures today, it was even more strained and difficult and challenging back in these biblical days. So Ruth is a Moabite. Moabites did not worship the God, the Abba, the Yahweh, the God of the Abrahamic covenant. They worshiped their own gods. And in all these ways, it was a reach for Ruth to be now considered a part of Naomi's family. And then, of course, as the story goes, after Ruth marries into the family, well, her husband, in fact, both of the sons died, leaving Ruth and Orpah with Naomi. And now it is the three women in Moab who are without resources and without husbands. And as is the sad case of a patriarchal society, that really means that they're without power or resource or opportunity.
I want to rewind a little bit through what you just said.
Sure.
You mentioned that Ruth is from Moab and that the Moabites didn't believe in Yahweh.
Right. Right.
Does their deity have a name? Do we know what that deity was? And how did that deity differ from the one that Naomi and her husband were worshiping and eventually became the deity that we worship today?
Yeah, so there is a god, small g, as opposed to uppercase G. There is a deity of sorts. Frankly, I can't remember the name of the Moabite deity, but it was considered sort of a pagan god, and so there were sacrifices and offerings to this pagan god. Truth be told, oftentimes some of the practices that were pagan actually in some ways had some parallels with practices that were of the Judeo-Christian tradition. That is to say, offerings, burnt sacrifices, things like that. But nonetheless, the most important element is that we're not talking about the God of the Abrahamic covenant.
That's really interesting. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about Naomi and Ruth,
obviously,
because they're the main things.
Yeah.
But there's this tangential character that is in it, but then just goes away, and
right.
that's Orpah.
Yeah.
What do we know about her other than that she was married to Naomi's son and then she just left for wherever?
Yeah, that's a great question, and frankly, it can be answered in a few words, which is not much at all. But let's give her some credit. So it's actually multiple times after all the men have died that Naomi releases her daughters-in-law. Naomi senses that there is no future for them in Moab, and Naomi is determined to return back to Bethlehem. It's been somewhere in the span of 10 years, the story goes, that they've been in Moab, and it's time to go back, at least according to Naomi, because probably she's thinking if she's going to be miserable anywhere, she might as well be miserable in her hometown, right?
Yeah.
So she says, I'm going to go back, and you ladies, you go back. You go back to your people and your families in Moab. And she really does it out of tremendous generosity. She says, there's no future here with me. I'm not going to have any more sons. And of course, she doesn't have any wealth or resources. So once she says, you go back. And both Ruth and Orpah, they both actually decline. Naomi says again, no, go back, go on, go back. And it's the second time. So to give Orpah a little bit of credit, she refuses the first time, but it is the second time after Naomi again makes the case, there is no future for you with me, that she agrees. And so she departs, and we never hear anything about her again. That's the end, and so we can only guess that she returns to her Moabite family, and she returns to the land of Moab, and we can imagine, without any blemish on her character, other than the fact that she was once married, we can imagine that a suitor was found for her. Much in the same ways that a suitor eventually stepped forward for Ruth. But again, that's farther down the story.
Okay. So Naomi says, don't hang out with me anymore. Get out of here. And one of her daughter-in-laws says, no, I think I'll stick around. And that's Ruth. Right. And they jump on some type of transportation, I'm guessing, and they take a ride off to Bethlehem. Like you said, a little town that no one's... I'm sure won't come up again.
Yeah. Just a little backwater town.
Yeah. On their way through the desert, Naomi, I guess, makes it a point to mention that they're riding past the mountain where Moses dies before Israelites enter the promised land. Is that right? Or did YouTube fail me?
Yeah, that actually doesn't appear, I don't believe, anywhere in the text, although, boy, I don't want to necessarily go toe-to-toe with YouTube. But as I look at the text, there's not much detail about the return to Bethlehem. Although I do want to just pause a minute longer. Okay. And sorry if I'm jumping the rails here, Taylor.
It's okay.
But,
I love it.
But frankly, before they make it back to Bethlehem, we get words from Ruth that, as I was thinking about it, I think the only more beautiful and more faithful and words come from Mary in what we now call the Magnificat. The third time that Naomi tries to release Ruth, and Ruth says to her, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you." And then she says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me and more as well." If you and your listeners can hear in their mind's ear a bit of the Magnificat and Mary, my soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. And those words, I hear very much the same selflessness, the same dedication, the same faith, the same courage in Ruth's response to Naomi. All of this before they get back to Bethlehem. But I don't see in the text, I don't see any indication that they pause for a little sightseeing where Moses came down with the tablets. The next thing we hear is just that they came to Bethlehem, and Naomi suggests that she be renamed. But we can get to that whenever you want.
Well, that's actually up next.
Okay.
So it's perfect timing. So Naomi gets to Bethlehem, and she changes her name to Mara. But then it seems as though that she's just continually after she kind of just says that, and then after that, everyone still refers to her as Naomi.
Yeah.
First question, I guess, is why would she change her name like that?
Right.
And the second question is, why did the name not stick through the rest of the book?
Yeah, this is where too often when I read scripture the first time, I miss some of the richness and color and character. And I think this is an example of where that can happen easily for anyone who's just reading it once. And so Naomi returns to Bethlehem, right? And scripture says the women of the town kind of greet her. So imagine she's been gone for 10 years. She took, along with her husband, she took a little bit of a risk because there was a famine in Bethlehem. And so imagine that there's some opinion, some judgment about that. We are not living in the first century of judgmentalism. And so there's some opinion and judgment about that. And then they've gone, and for 10 years they've been in Moab. Her husband has died and her sons have died. And so again, in their tradition, think about the book of Job where he loses so much and his friends think, well, what did you do to anger God? Mm-hmm. The judgment comes out about clearly you deserved these terrible events. So these women, these questions about, hey, so Naomi, what's up? How you been? That question might not be so innocent.
Well, it's not great.
Right. I mean, true enough, they didn't have emails or Facebook, so they may not have known. But I'm going to guess that they also may have known. And so behind the question, it's not quite as innocuous. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, because in printed words we can't hear tone, we can't be for sure about this, but hear these words spoken from Naomi with a tone that is anywhere from cranky to bitter to angry. She would have been feeling quite likely like God's totally abandoned her. Like God has visited one curse after another on her, and not unlike Job, she would have been a little bit like, woe is me. And so here in her response, just that crankiness, that bitterness. And so she is saying, well, you might as well call me Mara. Like you and I might say, well, you might as well call me loser. You might as well call me sad sack. She's giving herself a different name to capture not only an emotional tone, her bitterness, but to some degree, there's a little bit of accusation or theology in it because it's suggesting that God has, at the very least, abandoned her and perhaps even worse, cursed her. So that's her sort of
interpretation of her situation.
Yeah, and her crankiness. It's not like in other places of Scripture. It's not like where Saul gets renamed by God and by the voices of heaven, Paul, because a new ministry and a new mission and identity and purpose is taking shape. It's not like that renaming. It's really just Naomi's sort of somewhat acerbic and harsh personality coming out. And she's like, yeah, don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, because, my life stinks. And that's why it doesn't stick as well, because no one does call her Mara. And, oh, by the way, as hard as this return to Bethlehem might be, it's not the end of the story. Her
Right.
life gets better.
So Mara and Ruth are back at home,
Yeah.
or back in Bethlehem, and
And you can call her Naomi. Her friends called her Naomi.
okay,
Yeah, really. No one else called her Mara. She
right.
was just calling herself that.
yeah, and I guess they're getting hungry.
Yep.
This is chapter 2.
Yep.
And they're like, "Hey, we got to do something about food."
Yep.
In one part of research I did, it kind of alluded to the fact that Ruth went to work for somebody, but then a more, I guess from what I thought, a more scholarly source said it was more of like scavenging.
Yeah, the latter is closer to the truth. First of all, they would have returned likely to the family property. Only there's been a famine, and so the property, I'm sure, is yielding nothing, right? And it's actually reflective of just how Ruth is not just loyal to her mother-in-law, but she's engaged. I mean, she's hardworking. She's always scrapping, and so they're hungry. There are no men around. There are no brothers around to work the land. Food is not plentiful. And so Ruth says, all right, I'm going to go follow around these people in a field, and I'm going to pick up the remnants. I'm going to pick up the remnants that they don't pick up. So they're picking up they're harvesting the major grains of wheat, but there's always a little remnants that fall behind. And so imagine Ruth spotting a field that looks pretty plentiful, and just deciding, okay, I'm going to pick up the scraps. Hard work, bold work, risky work, because she could have been assaulted, she could have been abused, she could have been simply turned away from that field, from following them. But she dares go pick up the scraps, and that begins to fill out Ruth's not only loyal personality, but her bold personality too.
Yeah, let's rewind a little bit back to Moab.
Okay.
Were Naomi and her husband and her sons, were they like a well-off way in Moab, and then obviously all the men died, and then they weren't all of a sudden? But like, is that like how far is the fall for Ruth to the field? Is I guess what I'm asking.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so we can only infer that Naomi and her husband were immigrants to Moab. Maybe even refugees, although not political refugees as much as refugees from a famine, right? Mm-hmm. And so they would not have been seen as impressive characters, nor even their sons. In fact, there might have been some tension and hostility from the Moabites directed at these Israelites. So we don't really know a lot about Ruth in terms of her family of origin, but we can imagine that if she is agreeing to marry an Israelite, then they do not have status such that she's been married off to one of the local rising stars, right? She's actually sort of marrying some guy from the other side of the tracks. So when you ask how far has she fallen, I would say that it's how often has she fallen. First, to some degree, according to her land and culture, she has fallen by marrying an Israelite. And then to some degree, she has fallen because she's lost her husband. And oh, by the way, she's lost her husband without providing him any children, which was seen as the most significant provision that a wife could make for her husband. So in some ways, she's really left Moab, if not in disgrace, and certainly then in disappointment. And so now she's back in Bethlehem, where she's the alien, right?
Yeah.
So her sense of stature has dropped even further, right? Because Israelites didn't particularly care for the Moabites that came any more than the Moabites appreciated the Israelites who came into Moab. And of course, she's a widower or a widow and childless. And so, this is a woman who doesn't have a lot farther to fall, who doesn't have much to lose, which is why she's like, well, the heck with my reputation. I gotta provide for this household. I've got to provide for Naomi, who is my mother. And she's bold enough to go out into the fields and do just that.
Great. So now she's in the fields. She's scourging for whatever's left over. And that's where we kind of meet Boaz.
Correct.
Who is related, just so happens.
A near kin is the language.
Yeah, because plot, I guess. I don't know.
I know, it makes for a good plot.
Yeah.
But there's importance to this relation, but we'll talk about that later.
And what is the importance to the relation between Boaz and Naomi? Why are they related, I guess, in a literary sense?
No, that's a great way to frame it, because I was going to say there's importance that is both theological and then there's importance that is both legalistic. So you just asked, why are they related in a literary sense? It is because the sacred text, Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures are very mindful about genealogy.
Okay.
Very mindful about genealogy. And so it is important that Naomi and her sons and Boaz all have a genealogy that goes all the way back to like Genesis and the birth of the tribes.
Okay.
And again, it's a genealogy that will have real legs as when we get around to talking about the future that come from this family.
Right.
I won't spoil that at this time. Okay. But so from a literary purpose, genealogy is an important thing. From a legalistic purpose, as we see in chapter 3, that next of kin gives Boaz a legal right to claim both the land of Naomi and the property of Naomi, which, I'm sorry to say, especially for the women who are listening, which includes Ruth herself.
Oh.
We'll unpack that a little bit more later, or I can unpack it now.
Oh, let's unpack it now.
Well, okay. I mean, again, because women had no standing on their own, absent from the men to whom they were connected or married, while Naomi retained sort of rights to the property that she and her husband had inhabited before leaving, it's just waiting to be claimed by a rightful kin, right? And that property includes the land. It would have included livestock, but who knows if they returned with any livestock given their travels. But then again, according to Jewish law, it also includes daughters-in-law. If there is no son born, then and the daughter-in-law loses her husband, then the sort of custom and culture and law was that she could be married to, and I would dare say whether she wanted to or not, she could be married to the closest and next of kin. And so this next of kin business becomes a matter of legal importance as well as legacy.
Okay.
But Boaz was not the closest next of kin. Now that gets revealed at the end of chapter 3, I think it is, or maybe at the beginning of chapter 4. But let's talk a little bit more about what happens when Ruth goes into the fields and starts just collecting the scraps, because that's where we meet Boaz, and that's where fortunes begin to change and kindness and goodness begin to emerge.
Yeah. So Ruth meets Boaz he's all like, "Hey, I'm Boaz," and she's all like, "Hey, I'm Ruth," and like.
It's not quite that flirtatious yet.
Okay.
But you're definitely picking on some of the undercurrent.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know what was in the back of Boaz's mind at this early juncture.
Right.
We know what becomes at the forefront of Naomi's mind, and then by extension, Ruth's in the chapters to come. But bottom line is this. Ruth is spotted kind of collecting on Boaz's fields, the scraps. And who knows? I mean, the cynical part of me imagines that had Ruth not been lovely to the eyes of Boaz, just as you're suggesting, he might not have dealt with her so graciously. What we know is that he sees her, and something moves him to essentially find out who's that woman out in the field. He asks around about her, and then he hears the story of her loyalty to Naomi. He hears the story that she was the daughter-in-law to Naomi, that her husband has died, and that rather than returning to Moab to seek future stability, she has remained loyal to Naomi. He hears that Ruth has dealt with Naomi in an incredibly generous, gracious, loving, loyal way, and so he is warmed by that. He is heartened by that, and that's why he says, "Okay, then you know what? I'm gonna take care of you. You can continue to come to this field. You can continue to the word is glean. You can continue to pick up the scraps." And he goes farther to say, "And I will tell my people to leave you alone." Which has layers of significance. Leave you alone, not just in terms of driving you off the field, but also I'm going to tell my guys to leave you alone in terms of putting their hands on you.
Okay.
Which would not have been uncommon if a woman is out there working in the field, a strange woman with men. She would have been in some pretty significant danger. And so Boaz says, "No, I'm gonna get the word out to my workers. Let this woman stay and glean, and also leave her alone." We don't know if that's born out of sort of romantic intentions or just the kindness, the goodness of Boaz's heart. But that's what he does. And it's for 10 years, I think it's 10 years, or at least for many, many years, that arrangement persists.
Oh, okay.
He says, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to the people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds." By the way, that would not have been lost in terms of the Hebrew understanding about how the Lord rewards us for our deeds. That's a part of the theology of that. And so she stays. And she goes home and she tells her mom, and her mom's like, this is great. And that's when her mom says, "Oh, by the way, that guy, he's a near kin." That's when we find out that he's a near kin.
Yeah. She calls him a redeemer.
Yeah. Well, he is. Yeah, he is.
So eventually Ruth, Boaz takes a sleep in the field where he's working, I guess. And Ruth comes to visit him. And at that point, the things really start moving along.
Well, they do, and again, the devil's in the details. So imagine that the harvest is about concluded. So it's not been 10 years. It was 10 years that they were in Moab. It's been enough time for the harvest to conclude, right? And so there's a reaping festival. So at the beginning of chapter 3, Naomi says to her daughter-in-law, "My daughter, I need to seek some security for you so that it may be well with you." So good intentions there. And then Naomi plots. Naomi schemes. And here's the scheme. Now, here is our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you've been working. See, he was winnowing in the field. And so she says, so there's going to be a big party. There's going to be a lot of eating and drinking. So she tells her, put on your finest clothes, bathe, anoint yourself, like get yourself all dolled up, right? And just wait and watch. Don't mess with him. Don't flirt with him while the party's going on. Because she's thinking, if this party ends like many, he's gonna eat, he's gonna drink, he's gonna fall asleep. And so then she says, so once he falls asleep, then go and lay next to him and uncover his feet, which, oh my goodness, not to do, not a strange woman with a strange man, not to have uncovered feet. Go and uncover his feet and wait until he wakes up. You want me to go on? Because there's some richness to this.
Yeah, I mean, yes, please continue. But then I have a follow-up question after that.
Okay, all right. So what she's trying to concoct here, Taylor, is a moment where, to some degree, Boaz is placed in an uncomfortable situation. So he's asleep. Ruth lays next to him, uncovers his feet. He wakes up, and he doesn't remember. Like, oh my goodness, who are you? Because he's forgotten who she is. Who are you, and what are you doing here? And even though he doesn't say this, in the back of his mind, he's thinking, and what have I done to you? And so suddenly, in this moment, his own reputation is in jeopardy. His own image is called into question. He's afraid, man, does anyone know that I just did this? I don't know what I did, but what if I did what I might have done? And here my feet are naked in front of this strange woman. And what have I done? And so now he's kind of a little bit on the hook to figure out a way, right? And what is either super crafty, or another example of Ruth's thoughtfulness. She says, well, don't worry. So just put your cloak over me. No one will see me. No one needs to know I'm here. Now, we only have these words on the page,
right.
And so we don't know whether it's all part of the grand scheme or whether it's Ruth really trying to sort of save this guy the embarrassment. But she gives him a way out for whatever reason, right? And he says, oh my goodness, you are a worthy woman. I knew that before because I knew you were loyal to your mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And here you are again proving your decency, your kindness. In fact, the word that is used gets translated into almost like a sacred kindness. And so he looks with favor upon her. And then things go even more deeply. But you said you wanted to ask a follow-up question. So I just wanted to make sure that the tension between these events are not random occurrences. They are events that are born out of Naomi looking at Ruth and thinking, somehow I need to create some security for you. And then coaching Ruth into how to, frankly, exploit this moment when she is imagining that Boaz is gonna be drunk and passed out, and then how to turn that into leverage and then how to turn that leverage into security.
Okay, great. But my question is definitely off topic.
Okay.
But it occurs to me there's a lot of talk about feet in the Bible. And I guess I didn't realize it until just now. Why so much talk about feet in the Bible? Why, like, everyone's like, whenever someone touches someone's feet, it's always like a huge thing.
Yeah.
Or like, I'm not worthy to touch his feet. I'm not worthy to do this stuff. Like, what's going on? What is the symbolism behind the apprehension to interacting with someone's feet?
Well, let me ask you. Whose feet do you touch these days?
Well, my wife's. I guess.
Anyone else's?
No.
That's a good answer,
Okay.
especially if she listens to these
Yeah.
recordings. So it's not that dissimilar. You know, feet are seen as kind of an intimate part of our body, and first of all, in those days, they also were seen as one of our sort of most unclean part of our bodies. And so because of the concerns around cleanliness, well, don't touch someone's unclean body parts. But also, they were seen as just really intimate parts of our body, which really fast forwarding, but you probably have this in the back of your mind, when the woman anoints Jesus's feet with her tears, it is scandalous on so many levels. But there is an intimacy and a tenderness to one's feet that really should be reserved for the most intimate and tender of relationships.
Okay. Well, back to the story at hand.
Meanwhile, back to the story at hand.
At one point, there is a second suitor that appears.
Yeah.
And he rejects Ruth.
Eventually.
Right. Now, who is this guy?
Yep.
From what I understand, he rejects her based on the fact that she is from Moab, which means that there is some kind of beef there between the Israelites and the Moabites.
Yep.
Can we talk about what that beef is? Do we know what it is? Is it just because they worship a different deity,
yes.
or is it okay?
Okay, so lots of information to unpack in that. I'll work backwards, actually. So again, I mean, look, religious beefs from the beginning of time have been heated beefs.
Yeah.
Right? Whether we're talking about the Moabites and the Israelites, whether we're talking about Jews and Christians or Muslims, whether we're talking about Catholics and Protestants, those cultural tensions run deep and sometimes quite hot. So to some degree, Ruth might have not been a wholly attractive candidate for claiming because of her Moabite ancestry. But now let's loop back around to the introduction of this guy.
Yeah.
So Boaz thinks about it a little bit. The whole experience with waking up next to Ruth and her kindness and goodness. Ruth goes home, tells Naomi what's happened, and Naomi says, he's going to make it right, just you wait. And in fact, he does. But here's what he's got to do. He says to Ruth, so I actually am not the closest next of kin. There's a pecking order of sorts.
Okay.
About who gets to claim the rights to the property and to you. I do not in any way mean to trivialize the horrors of this kind of patriarchy with this example I'm about to give, but I know you love sports and I love sports. So it's like, when a team releases a player and puts them on waivers, there's a pecking order about who gets first dibs, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same as it relates to kinship. Although in this particular time, the closer the kin gets first rights. So Boaz says, so I'm actually not your closest kin. There's a closer kin. And he goes to that closer kin, and he introduces the closer kin to Ruth and to the story of Naomi and Ruth and to the property. And according to law, he takes witnesses, 10 men. This is at the beginning of chapter 4, and they all sit around in a circle. And this is a quite legalistic process, right? And so he says to the closest of kin, like, okay, you have first rights of refusal. And he introduces the closest of kin to Ruth, and the closest of kin knows about the property. And actually, he introduces the closest of kin first to Naomi and the property, not to Ruth. Sorry. Okay. And because it's an important distinction. And so actually, the closest of kin is like, yeah, I'll claim this property. Yeah, I'll take this. The closest of kin says, I will redeem it. This is chapter 4, verse 4. Then Boaz said, the day you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, you also are acquiring Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance. This is law, right? So Boaz first says, do you want the property? The guy's like, yeah, that sounds great. And then he says, oh, by the way, when you acquire the property, you acquire Ruth as well. And that's when the most immediate next of kin backs out. And he says, oh, no, I cannot redeem it for myself without damaging my own inheritance. Now, that's the language we get. I don't know if his inheritance would be damaged because he's got another mouth to feed in Ruth, or whether it would be damaged because his reputation might be damaged marrying a Moabite.
Okay.
We don't get any more information on that. All we know is that this most immediate next of kin, after learning that Ruth comes along with Naomi's property, backs out of the deal, leaving Boaz as the next guy in line to claim property and to rightfully marry Ruth.
So this other guy takes off, leaves the picture. Boaz steps in and marries Ruth.
Right.
Everyone lives happily ever after. One thing leads to another, and a guy rises from the dead and saves everyone's souls.
That's the Cliff Note version.
Yeah. I guess my next question is, whose bloodline in this situation is the most important? Is it Ruth or is it Boaz? Because the idea is that there's a direct bloodline.
Correct.
From Ruth and Boaz, from Naomi. Is the bloodline with Ruth or is the bloodline with Boaz and Naomi?
So that question of whose bloodline is significant, like every question as it relates to the Hebrew Scriptures, has a theological significance, right? And then has a more moral significance. What do I mean? So theologically, so what happens after Boaz and Ruth marry is that they then have a child, and Naomi ends up being the great-great-grandmother of David, the king of David.
The giant slayer.
Not only the giant slayer, but the one that Mark in his lineage is very clear to make sure that everyone knows that that Jesus comes from the same lineage as David, as King David, as the great king, right? So yeah, he's a giant slayer, but he's also in some ways the most important character, unless you think that Adam and Eve are also part of the most important characters, which people do from a historical standpoint, or from a lineage standpoint. There is an unbroken lineage in the covenant between Adam to David, and David all the way to to Jesus.
Okay.
And so that's the connection from a lineage standpoint. From a moral standpoint, it is a really powerful detail to understand that a powerless immigrant woman, that her blood joins the blood of the clan, of the tribe, and is mixed in the blood all the way moving forward, including Jesus. It lines up in a way that we Christians can say, look at how even in Jesus's own lineage, there is a diversity rather than a purity. Because as we talk about how Jesus reached out to the people on the margins, and as the early Christian church realized that Jesus' love, his life, his love, his death, resurrection, not just for the Jews, but also for the Gentiles. Well, we can point to some degree, even this story, you begin to understand that the promises of God aren't only for the narrow people that we once thought those promises were for, but they also are for, the people who come from all kinds of lands and all kinds of places. So that both in terms of sort of lineage and literary, as well as in terms of sort of moral, theological meaning. That's the significance of mixing Ruth in with Naomi's lineage.
Now, I guess the next question is, how is the story of Ruth and Naomi relevant to our faith as it stands today?
That's a great question. And I think first and foremost, both in terms of our Hebrew ancestors, so both for the Judeo part of the Judeo-Christian tradition, this story represents how God remains faithful to the covenant that God enters into with God's people. That even as there are trials and sufferings, and Naomi and Ruth had their share of trials and sufferings, that if you can but continue in faith, you will be rewarded with God's love and God's blessings. That's in the short 4 chapters of Ruth. What gets writ large in the Gospels that we Christians claim today. So the most important theological thread is that God's paying attention. God's hand is active in our lives. And if we can but stay faithful to God, God stays faithful to us and the covenant in which we are entered. That's the most significant thread through it all. I could say more to pluck out from the characters. Do you want me to say more?
More is always good.
So then you pluck out what each of the characters reveals. And so what's on display, first of all, from Ruth, is how loyalty, how faithfulness, how selflessness, how courage, how hard work, how risk, how boldness, how all those things can be rewarded by and blessed by God. You can pluck that out of all the qualities and attributes that Ruth demonstrates over this little story, and how she ends up where she ends up at the conclusion of the story. And I think to some degree that's true with Boaz as well. Whether he was just smitten by her looks or whether he was moved by hearing about her loyalty to Naomi, who knows? But I think in my reading, Boaz comes out like a pretty fine character, and like a character of of integrity, and a character that does not seem to exploit his opportunity with Ruth as much as to enter into more deeply his opportunity with Ruth. So that I would say about Boaz. And then let's go back to the start of it. In some ways, you've got Naomi, who perseveres. You've got Naomi, who shows an incredible degree of selflessness herself by releasing her two daughters, thinking about their future more than her own, looking at them and knowing that she's got nothing to offer them. Now, she could have tried to exploit them herself, but instead she releases them. I mean, so there's real faithfulness and decency on Naomi's part, as well as more than a little bit of crankiness, I would say, understandable and well-deserved, as well as more than a little bit of scheming and plotting, which, makes this a PG story, not just a G story. But so I think that we learn from the story arc about God's arc in our lives, and we learn from the story's characters about the kind of characters, the kind of morals to which we might adhere ourselves.
Wonderful. Well, Tim, that's about as much time as we have for today. I guess the classic question we asked of every guest at the end is, if someone wanted to come see you or hear you preach on a Sunday, where should they go?
Well, they should go to St. Luke's Church in East Grenwich, 99 Pierce Street. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to plug the church. They wouldn't only hear me preach, but they'd also hear some pretty special music as well. Or if they would like to sample St. Luke's from afar, they can go to find us in our live stream service, brilliantly produced at St. Luke's East Grenwich. That's the YouTube site. St. Luke's, East Grenwich, Rhode Island. We have a YouTube channel there. And we live stream at 10:15 every Sunday. We also have recently added a digital evangelism person to our staff, Emma Peterson. She's fabulous. And so we now even have an Instagram account, St. Luke's EG, where we post several times a week. On Tuesdays, we post a little sermon snippet, a little reel with some sort of provocative question. On Thursdays, we post pictures that oftentimes fall under the theme of where the divine and the daily meet. And then we have other posts such as our celebration of Pride Month this month and Father's Day coming this weekend as well. So Instagram, YouTube, and 99 Pierce Street in East Greenwich, all ways that people can check out St. Luke's Church.
Wonderful. Well, Tim, it was a pleasure having you, and I hope to have you on again soon.
Taylor, thanks so much, and thanks for the good work you do. It's a gift to the diocese and anyone who tunes in to your podcast. So thanks so much.
Okay. Goodbye.
They lived not only in ages past, there are hundreds of thousands still. The world is bright with the joyous saints who love to do Jesus' will. You can meet them in school or in lanes or at sea, in church or in trains or in shops or at tea. For the saints of God are just folk like me, and I mean to be one too.
Thank you for listening to Tea Time Theology, a ministry of St. John's Cathedral in Rhode Island. We would like to thank our producers, Mo Akande, Ivy Swinsky, and Taylor Wilkie. Special thanks to Mo Akande and David Hines for the stream music, and our sponsors, the Episcopal Diocese of Rhode Island and the Right Reverend Nicholas Knisley. Follow us at Tea Time Theology on all social medias.